Welcome to the Greatness of the Generation Z podcast. I'm Joel Ortiz.
I'm Heriberto Pando, and today we have Willard Linzy. Now, Willard Linzy has quite a resume.
It's a little simple something. A little bitty guy trying to help in some small way.
Well, let's just hear a little bit about your background.
Well, actually, like I said, I am a long-term resident of Oklahoma County. Lived in Oklahoma City all my life, and let's see, 25 years with the state of Oklahoma. Started out as a police officer, went into social work, went over to the state capitol under Walter's administration as a fiscal analyst, and stayed on into the Keating administration and stayed there for another 6 years. So, a total about 8 years in looking at fiscal matters and funding state government at the state level. And then went to the Attorney General's office about a year and a half and ended my 25-year career with state service with the Department of Civil Emergency Management. So, been around the block as it relates to state government and been relatively involved in an intrinsic way with city government and local community politics. So I think I know my way a little bit around those and the issues that we're dealing with today. And again, there's a lot of challenges out there. So that's a little bit about my history. That's where I've been politically. Um, like I said, I'm happy to try to answer specific questions about what I see as a problem and propose solutions or directions we could look for some solutions in the communities that you represent. Again, we have talked a little bit about your constituency, and clearly that's not my strong suit, but government and politics, I think, is, and we're going to find that to be everywhere. In any and every community, the game is all the same. It's, can we broker effective policy outcomes for people who have specific needs and requests?
So, what led you down to this path?
Well, actually, I think the path for me was really kind of driven by the fact that I was raised on Second Street. Now, Second Street is a code for you, for those that live there. Back in the early years of Oklahoma, we had a very divided city, and so coming out of the 50s, I was born in 58, right at the ending of that, leading up to the 1964 and the Civil Rights Act. We still had segregated cities. Our city had defined areas for Black people and defined areas for white people. I never saw that as a right thing to do as far as public policy or government policy, and I was always challenged by it, even as a young lad. That troubled me. So we went into the 64, 68 era, up into the Martin Luther King assassination and then the John F. Kennedy assassination. And we saw society to begin to take some very different approaches to how to manage the social issues in Oklahoma. And that's kind of how I entered into politics. Roughly in about the 70s, I graduated in 76 from high school. My early years and my experience in 72 to 76 was a growth experience for me in Oklahoma. We entered into a period of forced busing in 1972. The Oklahoma City public school system had drug its feet for many, many years, saying that they were going to get around to desegregating. But finally, the federal judge had to intervene and order them to segregate. And so that's kind of how my entry started into the politics. My introduction into high school was during the 1970s. 1972, the Oklahoma City school system was placed under federal directive by a federal judge to integrate because they had taken such a long time promising that they would integrate after the 1964 passage of the Civil Rights Act. And so in 72, they were forced to bus students around the city in order to achieve racial integration. So that took me to Southeast High School. That was 1972. And we had a very interesting experience going to Southeast High School. That's kind of in that area where we were talking about now it's a growing Hispanic community. Back then it was predominantly a white Anglo-Saxon community. They were very protective, I guess, of keeping it that way. And we weren't the most welcomed students to go to Southeast High School in 1972. But we matriculated through that for 4 years. I graduated from high school and getting beyond the turbulent years of 1972 and 73, things became much better in 74, 75. And so I graduated in 76 from Southeast High School and went on to the University of Oklahoma, which took me to my college years. And from there, the rest is kind of history. We were there for 2 years as a music major, and found out I wasn't going to ever play Juilliard. And so we decided to transfer to the business college. And that's when I began to pursue my bachelor's degree in business administration and management. So that's kind of my matriculation, high school to college things. And then, like I said, it's from there, we ended up going into a state government, DHS, police officer there, and then on to the state capitol, Office of State Finance. And here's where we sit today. Now I'm an insurance agent. Don't ask me how all that goes together. I don't know what it does.
Willard, how did you get your political ideologies? I know that most minorities vote Democrat. How did you get your political ideologies to vote more on the right as a Republican?
Well, interesting as it might be, I was actually a Democrat for a year. My first year when I registered as a voter and at 18, I did register as a Democrat. All my family members are Democrats. All of my experience in the community has been brokered and forged with Democrat activists. I saw their struggles. I was there during the bad times. And I think all of their times were bad, but if you talk to them today, they'll say they had good moments, and there were achievements that were made under Democrat rule. Clearly, we want to be focused in saying the Democrat Party ruled the state of Oklahoma for 100 years, from statehood in 1907 all the way up to 2002. That's when the Republicans first took over the House of Representatives, and then in 2008 they took over control of the Senate. So when I say my politics was shaped and my ideologies was shaped in what I saw as very bad scenarios under Democrat rule, but that's just how I feel as an individual. I saw them pander to the Black community. I saw them promise some things on election campaign trails and never deliver. I saw them produce bad public policy that sent a lot of Black people to jail in disproportionate numbers, ushered another large chunk of them onto welfare in disproportionate numbers, denied and limited their access to health care in disproportionate numbers. And then I saw a community of folks that thought all that was a good thing, and I never did. I never saw those types of public policy as being good for any people, let alone for Black people. And so the next year I changed my registration to Republican. I've been a Republican ever since I was 19 years old, and been involved in community politics under Democrat rule. I simply didn't see it was proper nor wise to send a Republican to a Democrat-controlled legislature with some expectations of being able to help African-American people as a community. I never saw it as such, and worked very diligently behind the scenes to make sure that we send African-Americans who are Democrats to the Democrat-controlled legislature. When we saw the shift, the tide, if you might say, the changing of tides, I found that it was very difficult to convey that message to the African-American voting community. They really did believe that their party had their best interest. They really did believe that sending Democrats was a right thing to do. So under Republican rule, they basically just been sending Democrats who sit up there, smoke coffee, and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes. not a real good way to run a railroad or engage in public policy. However, it was a learned behavior that had come from almost 40 years. I think they elected the first African American to the state legislature in Oklahoma County. John B. White, I believe, was the first African American elected to the House of Representatives that was a Democrat. And then we had E. Melvin Porter, and you could follow the litany of folks that followed, and it worked well under Democrat rule, in my opinion. Since 2004, going into the 2006 elections, I don't believe that it's worked well at all. I don't know that anyone has really brought anything home for the African American community as a Democrat elected official. Nothing more than the Republicans have let them bring home. Now, they won't tell you that, but those are the realities of how the game of politics is worked. It takes 51 votes in the House to deliver a victory for any piece of legislation. It takes 25 votes, technically, to deliver a victory in the Senate for a Democrat. Those numbers have gotten worse and worse and worse each year at the state level, to where today the Republicans control the veto and don't need a single Democrat vote at all in either chamber. And I say that is a reality that nobody ever talks about. So why am I interested in what happens at the county? County politics is a little bit different. They only divided three ways. All counties are divided in three equal parts, and Oklahoma County is no different. What's in the best interest of the Hispanic community? What's in the best interest of the Asian community? What's in the best interest of the African American community? Well, once you understand the principles of politics, it takes 50 plus 1 votes in your favor to make a deal happen or to keep a bad deal from happening. And today, County Commission District 1, while good things, I guess, have been done, and I don't know what the community asked for, but if they're pleased with it, I still say far more could have been done. And so it's not an indictment on the incumbent. It's just a realization that it's a wrong time, wrong season. And so if we're going to move things forward in behalf of any community, whether it be the Hispanic, whether it be the Asian, whether it be the Latino, African American, you're still going to need one vote. And I believe I know my way around on it. Like I said, I've done politics at the state level, a little bit higher level. And while, yes, it took more people to go in the affirmative at those levels, to translate that down to the county, it's just a one vote makes all the difference. And I'd like to believe I can come to the table and broker those kinds of outcomes.
So just more general on voting. Maybe some of our guests might be interested in voting but don't exactly know how. Would you be able to describe that process for them?
Well, voting is a process. Each individual citizen can register, unless, of course, there are circumstances whereby maybe they've been convicted of a felony and their right to vote has been suppressed, arrested, or whatever. Then they would not be eligible to vote, register and vote. There could be those that don't have citizenship. They are not eligible to register and vote. But for the mainstream, those that can should register and they should vote. Now, when I say that, voting is a duty and a responsibility. I believe you should be informed. I don't think you should just go into a polling place and check a box because somebody tells you to check it. I saw that happen in the African American community, and we tried to message that to the Hispanic community, and I believe they got it. I really do. They do ask questions. They do things like what you're doing here today. They bring both opposing sides to the table and ask questions. Why now? So voting is an awesome responsibility. It is an awesome responsibility, in my opinion, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. So when I say register people to vote, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, you need to go vote. And we've had serious data that shows that that wasn't happening. 20 to 30% of the people were showing up and actually voting. They call it low voter turnout. I think some of that has to do with some of the abuses that have happened in the system prior to we getting into 2022 and 2024. So apathy did grow because they had a lot of folks voting for folks that were registered that didn't go vote. I think we've cleaned that up with voter ID. We will be looking closely at things that happen with the voter absentee ballot process, the request process. And as we begin to tighten that up and increase even greater levels of integrity within the system, we eventually get down to where only the real persons who are eligible to vote will be voting. And so there are still some elements of fraud, or there's opportunities for fraud. And those things still need to be cleaned up. But the individual voter is the one that really should determine who represents them at the state capitol, at the county commissions, at the federal levels. As you know, we've got both Senate seats now in play since Senator Inhofe has announced that he's resigning effective January 3rd of next year. We didn't foresee that. We have all statewide elected offices are in play. The governor is up for re-election, so is the lieutenant governor. So there's going to be a lot of political activity going on. People that aren't registered needs to register. And then when you go vote, you need to vote, in my opinion, in a way that moves your agenda. So it may not necessarily be that the Democrat Party ideology will get them to where they're going. They need to be very informed on that. In the general election, a voter can vote for a candidate of either party with no regards to their political affiliation. So if they're taking chickens and you need your message heard, you might want to send chicken. If you're taking ducks and you want your message heard, you might want to send a duck. Oh, excuse me. So that's when I say, do a person know what to vote for? In many cases, they don't. In my community, my experience was they would vote for a Democrat even though it wasn't in their best interest, strictly on what they believed to be ideological lines. And repeatedly, they would fail year after year. And we'll talk about the mean old Republicans. I contend it's not so much about the mean old Republicans as much as it's very uninformed voters who really don't understand how to move their agenda. They're only doing what they're told. In many cases, it was to their own detriment, and they just simply didn't know. So, you know, I wouldn't vilify a victim, but for your community, if your listeners are taking notes, your political affiliation only really matters in the primaries. When you get beyond the primaries, you need to be talking to the person that can get your message across the finish line. And if it happens to be a Republican, I encourage your listeners to get beyond what they believe is ideological differences. Because at the end of the day, ideology doesn't get brokered at the state capitol. You could say Republicans vote with Republicans, but that's what they're supposed to do. The only person, and this is a tacky comment, so the only person who's talking about bipartisan support are the losers. When you control the chamber, you don't need bipartisan support. So that word has always been a negative that they tried to flip and make it positive to say, oh, we've got bipartisan support. To Willard, what that means is you couldn't get the deal done by yourself. So you have to reach out and ask someone else to help you get your deal done. I'm not opposed to bipartisan support. I think if it's good legislation, everybody should vote for it. So I wouldn't call that bipartisan support. But the reality is, if you controlled the veto in any chamber, we didn't need your vote. We're glad you voted for it because it was good policy, but it wasn't needed. And so they would call that bipartisan support. And I'm saying, well, it was going to pass anyway. And that's what I'm saying. If it's going to pass anyway, they've got the votes to make it happen. They're not looking for bipartisan support or buy-in. They're looking for someone in the Democrat Party who's going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And yeah, we'll get to call it bipartisan support, but they were going to pass it anyway. They had to vote.
That's very powerful what you said. Would you mind explaining to everyone what a veto is?
A veto really occurs at the state level. You have to have an executive officer um, that has the authority to approve action of the legislative body. Just a quick step back. Uh, our government is a republic. It was forged by the framers as a constitutional republic. In that, it means that it represents the people. And in the context of how our government was formed, there's three branches of it. There's the judiciary, there's the legislative, and then there's the executive branch. Each one kind of checks each other, with the exception of the judiciary. It's kind of hard to check the judiciary, but generally they're the last branch that gets engaged in public policy because basically they rule on matters of law regarding whether it's constitutional, whether it's the right thing to do, or whether it wasn't. And if no one files a complaint with the courts cannot step in by themselves and take actions against the executive branch or the legislative branch. Someone would have to sue either the governor, and if it's a state, or mayor if it's at the city level. So if no one sues, the courts can know it's going wrong, but there's nothing they can do about it. When we get to the legislative side, the legislature isn't the end of it all. Yes, they can decide what gets made as law, meaning what can get passed. If it's a Republican caucus, the Republicans can determine what bills that are introduced go to the governor's desk. Now, excuse me again. Once bills are passed, they first start in the House. They would go to the Senate, which we call the House of Opposite Origin. The legislature is divided into two chambers. So you have the House and you have the Senate. That's the same thing at the federal level. But once they do both of those, and the affirmative vote then it becomes a law, a bill that's been enacted, and it goes to the governor for signature. Should the governors believe there's still fundamental material flaws in that bill, even though both chambers of the legislature has passed it, the governor has the authority to veto that, to say that my people have looked at it, we think you got it wrong, it's bad policy for the state or whatever, and so I'm going to veto it as the governor. A single person representing the executive branch has that authority by our Constitution. Should that happen, the bill then could go back to the legislative bodies that passed it, and they could override the governor's position on that. So it happens on occasions. It's not very often. It's not that often, I guess, that a governor vetoes a piece of legislation, because remember, 101 members looked at it in the House, 48 members looked at it in the Senate. What makes this one person more knowledgeable and more informed than 148 people who's already looked at it? But there are cases where it does happen. And so when it goes back to the legislative branch, the Constitution requires that they have a supermajority vote in each chamber to override the governor's veto. And that's what we call about overriding a veto. So I can pass a piece of legislation in the House of Representatives with 51 votes. That's a simple majority. If it gets vetoed, I have to have 76 votes in the affirmative to override the veto. So the bar is raised somewhat substantially should the governor veto something. The same thing would happen in the Senate. It takes 25 votes to pass it. In the Senate, it's going to take 36 votes or so to override a veto if it gets vetoed. But that's back into the weeds of politics. The voter oftentimes is very unaware of why their representatives, senators fail, because it's not an easy cakewalk. And like I say, the governor can shut it down and really make things a lot more difficult, because they then would have to have a supermajority vote to override it.
What county level issues do you see more these days?
At the county level, I have spent some time looking at matters related to the county. I think we have some serious concerns as it relates to the county jail situation. County sheriff no longer runs the county jail, but there is a trust that was created that's funded by the county commissioners and it has the duty of running that jail. There are some growing pains there, but more importantly, I would tell you that there are people going to jail that simply shouldn't be going there.
Mm.
And while they may be dying in the custody of county jail detention officers and administrators, in many cases they never should have ever been there. I think we need to begin to look at those kinds of issues. That's a county matter that's clearly within the scope of the county commission and the board of county commissioners to look at, review, and recommend changes. We have issues of mental health. And I'll tell you, we're doing well with mental health. I know that there are some gaps. There are some holes in the continuum of care where individuals are being left in the custody and care of individuals who are ill-suited and unprepared, untrained to provide for their care. And in many cases, regrettably, they're actually losing their lives. We're not hearing about it, but these individuals who are trying to exist are being forced to stay within their home environments. In many cases, are killing their loved ones. I don't know that it's intentional, but dead is dead. You don't get to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the county has a responsibility for looking at that. It once held a responsibility for that kind of care, and perhaps we need to be talking about how they do that again. So those are two things that I think jumps out at me glaringly. Clearly, roads and bridges. We've always had bad roads in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's acceptable. I'm not sitting there saying that and jokingly laughing. I said, well, we've always had them, so we should always, what's the problem? We should get along with it. I think we can do better. And I would make every effort to look at how we're maintaining roads and bridges in the county anyway, and see if there's opportunities there to do that in a better way. So roads and bridges, the mental health continuum, I believe it clearly needs to be revisited. And then the issue of county jails, who should be going to jail, who shouldn't, under what conditions should they be going to jail. I say it's a resource issue. Should we be using county resources to do things that I will argue in the days ahead are really unconstitutional? And if it's unconstitutional, we have no duty to take any action to further them. So that's something I would put cities and municipalities on notice to say that we'll look at that in the days ahead. If you want to do things that that you can't demonstrate our constitution, you have to do it at the city level. Some people are arguing that incarceration is the price we pay for breaking a law, and I don't think we have constitutional authority to say that. The debt to society in many cases is financial, and if it's financial, then that's not a necessarily a debt to society. It means you get a job, you go get some money, you pay for it. If you don't, I don't think that should place you in jeopardy of being placed in jail, but it is currently. That's a large chunk of who's going to jail these days, of people that don't have the means with which to pay. And I don't know that policy has been it's in place, but I don't know that anyone has taken a look at it from the depth that I want to look at it and say that it shouldn't be happening. Yeah, under no conditions should that ever be happening. I've looked at some other court proceedings similar to that has to do with literal civil debt. And in some of those cases, we're finding those individuals sitting in the county jail. Again, I'm not going to reach into the municipality today, but I'm going to say that we would put municipalities on notice to say that if you're throwing people in your jail for doing those kinds of offenses against your municipality and city ordinances, it's all a matter of times that someone's going to ask you to give some answers to that. And I'd love to lead that charge at the county level in the days ahead, because it shouldn't be happening. You can't arrest people for having debt matters and place them in jail as if they raped someone or robbed a bank, but they're doing it. In 2006, I resigned from state service to run for the state legislature. I have a longtime friend of mine that was an insurance agent. It gave me the latitude and flexibility to work the hours that I wasn't campaigning to generate commissions from the sale of insurance coverage. And I just kind of stayed there. And so I've been doing that for about 10 years or so since I left state service in 2006.
So what does a day in insurance look like?
Well, there's a lot of need for insurance. Insurance is the management of risk. We pool dollars. An insurance corporation company will pool dollars, and the hopes are is that all of its policy insured will not be running to ask for a claim to be paid at the same time. That's the hopes. And so, by managing risk, an insurance agent is able to give you the ability to replace your home if it gets destroyed by fire or tornado, because every 2,000 other people put money into a pot in case their house gets destroyed by fire or by a tornado. So we manage that risk. And so that's what the day in the life of an insurance agent looks like, is we're trying to identify folks who have insurable risk that aren't covered. And again, I'm a little jaded on the issue. The agent's a lot more optimistic than I am. I generally have found that people buy insurance when they need it. And that's a real struggle, because I can't sell it to you when you need it. After your house catch fire, it's a little late to take out home and owner's insurance. So we try to message that before the house catches on fire, before the tornado burns it down, to tell them, here are your risks. If you don't take insurance out, you are really self-insuring yourself. You are managing your own risk. You know, it may not ever happen. So in case you win. But if it ever happens, you're gonna have to rebuild the house yourself. And so those are realities. That's what the life of an insurance agent look like on a day-to-day basis. People call, what are your rates? How do your rates compare with your competitors and whatever? And sometimes they go with my company, other times they go with the other, but sometimes they don't. They just have to take it on themselves. Or I'll take my chances. Hope nothing happens. Either one of those are free choice issues, and as a Republican, I believe in individual choices and individual responsibility. That's their right to make that call. You know.
Yeah.
So what are you passionate about?
I'm passionate about economics. I really am. Economic development, community enrichment. Those have always been my passions since I was a little boy. I got into model city building. I had matchbox cars, and my mom would always make sure I got one or two a year or whatever. I amassed a pretty large collection. I passed them on to my son. And so, but my passion has always been, how do we build a better world? How do we bring people together for the collective good of the whole in a way that a generation from now, they look back and say, well, I'm glad my parents did this or my grandparents did that. And so that's always been my passion. I saw that taken away from the African American community under the name of integration, and we saw that community of people just now beginning to reemerge itself as buying from one another in behalf of one another. But for many years, all of our economic centers went into decay because we just simply stopped doing what Hispanics do. They do business with each other. The Asians have a district. They do business with one another. You can't really find a black center of commerce today. They're in the process of rebuilding them. But I just think that we're way behind the curve on this deal. We've lost a lot as a result of reconstruction and then integration. And so, but that's my passion. I'll still be looking for individuals who are committed and see the good and being supportive of one another from an economic standpoint. Yeah, capitalism isn't bad. It depends on who's getting the capital.
You grew up in a challenging time. How did you, where did you find your motivation to keep pushing through and become the person you are today?
I have two children. I have a son, Oklahoma City firefighter. Watched him go through high school, off to the Marine Corps, come back. He has his own family now. And my motivation I get from the fact that I have children coming after me. He has three sons. I have a daughter. She has a daughter. So my grandkids and my children, they are
Family,
my
man.
motivation. I may never make it across the bridge with them, but I have every intention on building that bridge so that they will make it across and they can bring my grandkids with them afterwards. So that's my motivation, and I that goes to you, your children, and your community. I challenge you not to think about just yourself. There are those who are going to come after you, and so what you do today should create a better opportunity for them tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really important. Family, friends, really community as a whole. I like that you pointed that out. It's always better to focus on the community's best, not just yourself's best.
You got to keep putting money in the community and work with each other.
Yes,
And we all
sir.
help each other as a community. We all grow together.
That's correct. Um, since I've been divorced, that's been a real major challenge because a lot of times I'm finding that people are looking at what's in it for me. I will have to remind interested admirers that I'm very externally motivated. I'm really not looking out for what's good for me and what's in my best interest. I'm more concerned, ma'am, with where are you wanting to go? What would you like to see happen? And so, to that extent, um, they try to point me to, well, what do you want? What are you looking for? I'm going to die. I'm, I'm up in age. Let's see if I can do some good to help the next person along. And so, but I've always been externally motivated. I don't think even when I was married, my wife probably didn't understand that either. She thought I had an angle that I was always trying to get over on the next person. Nah, I was always motivated towards trying to give someone something that they otherwise couldn't get themselves.
That's great that you're like that.
Yeah.
One thing I've learned: be honest, tell the truth.
Well, all right. Thank you, Willard, for coming on today. It was great getting to talk to you.
Thank
Yeah.
you for inviting
Thank you
me
so
on.
much, Willard.
Well, let's talk more in the days ahead.
All right.
Yes, sir. Of course.